My name is Sarah Chen, and 3 weeks ago, I thought I knew who I was. I was a 28-year-old graphic designer living in Portland, Oregon, with a decent apartment, a reliable car, and a predictable routine. My biggest worry was whether I'd have enough clients to pay rent next month. That was before my great-aunt Margaret died and left me her entire estate in a small town called Millbrook, 3 hours south of Portland. I'd only met Aunt Margaret twice in my life. She was my grandmother's sister, a woman who lived like a hermit in an old Victorian house that seemed frozen in time. My family always spoke about her in hushed tones, saying she was eccentric and preferred her privacy. When the lawyer called to inform me about the inheritance, I was shocked. Why would she leave everything to me, a niece she barely knew? The drive to Millbrook felt like traveling back in time. The town had maybe 3,000 residents, with a main street lined with antique shops and a diner that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1950s. Margaret's house sat on the edge of town, surrounded by towering pine trees that seemed to guard it from the outside world. The Victorian architecture was stunning, but desperately needed maintenance. Paint peeled from the shutters, and the wraparound porch sagged under the weight of decades. As I walked through the front door, the smell of old wood and lavender hit me immediately. The house was like a museum, filled with furniture from different decades, vintage photographs covering every surface, and bookcases that reached from floor to ceiling. Everything was meticulously organized, as if Margaret had been preparing for someone to eventually go through her belongings. I spent the first day just wandering through the rooms, trying to understand the woman who had lived here. The kitchen still had her teacup sitting on the counter, and the living room held a knitting basket with an unfinished scarf. It felt intrusive, like I was walking through someone's private thoughts. The bedroom was where I found the coat. It was hanging in an old cedar wardrobe, a beautiful wool coat in deep navy blue that looked expensive and well-maintained. The fabric was soft to the touch, and the craftsmanship was exceptional. As I lifted it from the hanger, I noticed it was heavier than expected. There was something sewn into the lining. My heart started racing as I felt along the inner seam. There was definitely something there, something flat and rectangular. I found a small pair of scissors in Margaret's sewing kit and carefully opened the hidden pocket. Inside was an envelope, yellow with age, with my name written in Margaret's careful handwriting. The letter inside was brief but chilling. "Dear Sarah, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you've inherited more than just my house. The coat belonged to your real grandmother, not the woman you've known as Grandma Rose. Your family has been lying to you your entire life. They'll try to erase you, just like they tried to erase her. The truth is in the basement, behind the wine rack. Trust no one from the family. You're the only one who can set this right. Love, Aunt Margaret P.S." The key is in the music box on my dresser. I sat on Margaret's bed, reading the letter over and over again. My hands were shaking, and I could feel my entire world shifting beneath my feet. What did she mean by real grandmother? Grandma Rose had been part of my life since I was born. She lived in Seattle, sent me birthday cards, and made the best apple pie I'd ever tasted. How could she not be my real grandmother? The music box was exactly where Margaret said it would be. It was a delicate piece with a ballerina that spun to the tune of Für Elise. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was an old brass key. My hands were trembling as I held it, knowing that whatever I found in the basement would change everything. The basement stairs creaked with every step as I descended into the darkness. The smell of damp earth and old wood filled my nostrils. I found the wine rack against the far wall, filled with bottles covered in dust. When I moved it aside, I discovered a hidden door that looked like it had been sealed for decades. The key fit perfectly. Behind the door was a small room, more like a large closet, with a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. The walls were covered with photographs, documents, and newspaper clippings. As I looked closer, I realized they were all about a woman who looked exactly like me. Her name was Elena Hoffman, and according to the documents, she had been my grandmother. The photographs showed her in various stages of life, from a young woman in the 1940s to what appeared to be her last photo in the 1960s. The resemblance was uncanny. We had the same dark hair, the same almond-shaped eyes, the same small scar above the left eyebrow that I'd inherited from what I thought was a childhood accident. But it was the newspaper clippings that made my blood run cold. The headlines told a story of mystery and disappearance. Local woman vanishes without a trace. Family searches for missing mother. And finally, Elena Hoffman declared dead after 5 years. According to the articles, Elena had been married to my grandfather, Robert Chen, and they had one daughter, my mother. But in 1967, Elena had simply vanished. The police found no evidence of foul play, no signs of struggle, nothing. She had simply disappeared, leaving behind her husband and 5-year-old daughter. As I read through the documents, I found letters that Elena had written to Margaret, her sister. The letters spoke of feeling watched, of strange phone calls, of a growing fear that someone was trying to harm her. The last letter, dated just 2 days before her disappearance, was desperate. "Maggie, I don't know who to trust anymore. Robert has been acting strange, and I think someone is following me. If something happens to me, please take care of little Annie. Don't let them erase me from her life. The truth is in the safe deposit box at First National Bank. Key is taped under the kitchen sink. I love you, sister. Elena." I sat in that hidden room for hours, pieces of a puzzle slowly coming together. My mother's name was Annie, and she had been 5 years old when Elena disappeared. Somehow, my family had convinced her that Rose was her real mother, that Elena had never existed. But why? What had happened to Elena? And why had everyone conspired to hide the truth? The documents showed that Margaret had been trying to find Elena for decades. She had hired private investigators, followed leads, and kept detailed records of everything she discovered. But Elena had vanished completely, as if she had never existed at all. As I climbed back up the basement stairs, my mind was reeling. I had come to Millbrook to settle my great-aunt's estate. But instead, I had discovered that my entire family history was a lie. My real grandmother hadn't died of natural causes when my mother was young. She had disappeared under mysterious circumstances, and someone had gone to great lengths to erase her from our family's story. I looked at the coat hanging in the wardrobe, and now I understood its significance. This wasn't just any coat. It was Elena's coat, the last connection to a woman who had been deliberately erased from our family's history. Margaret had kept it safe all these years, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. But Margaret's letter had warned me that they would try to erase me too. Who were they? And why would they want to erase me? I was just a graphic designer from Portland who had stumbled upon a family secret. What threat could I possibly pose? As night fell over Millbrook, I realized I couldn't go home and pretend I had never found this information. I had to find out what happened to Elena Hoffman, my real grandmother. I had to understand why my family had lied to me for 28 years, and I had to be prepared for whoever might try to stop me from learning the truth. The letter had said to trust no one from the family, but I wasn't sure I could handle this alone. I needed help, but from whom? Margaret had spent decades trying to solve this mystery, and she had died with the truth still hidden. What made me think I could succeed where she had failed? I made a decision that night. I would stay in Millbrook for as long as it took to find the truth. I would follow every lead, examine every document, and piece together the story of Elena Hoffman's disappearance. I owed it to her, to Margaret, and to myself to understand what had really happened to my family. But as I lay in Margaret's bed that first night, wearing Elena's coat to feel closer to the grandmother I had never known, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The house seemed to creak more than usual, and every shadow looked like it might be hiding someone. Margaret's warning echoed in my mind. "They'll try to erase you." I had no idea who they were, but I was about to find out. I woke up at dawn, still wearing Elena's coat. The morning light streaming through Margaret's bedroom window made everything seem less mysterious, but the weight of what I had discovered the night before hadn't diminished. I had a grandmother I never knew existed, and someone had gone to great lengths to erase her from our family's history. My first stop was the First National Bank, the same bank mentioned in Elena's last letter to Margaret. The building was a classic brick structure on Main Street, unchanged since the 1960s. I walked in wearing Elena's coat, hoping it might somehow give me courage or luck. The bank manager, a woman named Patricia Williams, who looked to be in her 60s, greeted me with the kind of warm smile that small-town people are famous for. When I explained that I was Margaret Chen's great-niece and showed her the documentation from Margaret's estate, her expression shifted. "Oh, Margaret," she said, her voice soft with sympathy. "She came in here regularly, you know, always asking about the same thing." Patricia leaned closer and lowered her voice. She was looking for information about a safe deposit box that belonged to Elena Hoffman. Elena was her sister, but that box was sealed decades ago when Elena was declared dead. My heart raced. What happened to the contents of the box? That's the strange thing, Patricia replied, glancing around to make sure we weren't being overheard. According to our records, the box was emptied in 1972, 5 years after Elena disappeared. But it wasn't emptied by family members or the police. It was emptied by someone with proper legal authorization, though the paperwork from that time period is incomplete. She pulled out a thick folder and showed me copies of old documents. The signature on the authorization form was illegible, but the date was clear, March 15th, 1972. Whatever Elena had hidden in that safe deposit box, someone had claimed it just 5 years after her disappearance. Did Margaret ever find out who emptied the box? I asked. Patricia shook her head. She tried for years. She even hired lawyers to look into it, but the trail went cold. Whoever did it knew exactly how to cover their tracks. I thanked Patricia and left the bank with more questions than answers. Someone with legal authority had emptied Elena's safe deposit box. Someone who had known exactly what they were looking for. This wasn't a random disappearance. It was planned, methodical, and professional. My next stop was the Millbrook Public Library, a small building next to the town hall. The librarian, an elderly man named Frank Morrison, had been working there for 40 years. When I mentioned Elena Hoffman, his face became serious. "You're not the first person to ask about Elena," he said, leading me to a quiet corner of the library. Margaret came in here regularly, researching newspaper archives and town records. She was convinced that Elena's disappearance wasn't what it seemed. Frank pulled out several boxes of archived newspapers from the 1960s. Elena was involved in something before she disappeared. She was asking questions about the town's history, specifically about some property deals that had happened in the 1950s. She seemed to think there was something illegal going on. He showed me copies of the Millbrook Gazette from 1966 and 1967. In several issues, there were small articles about town council meetings, where Elena Hoffman had spoken up about questionable land acquisitions. She had been particularly concerned about a large tract of forest land that had been sold to developers at far below market value. The land deal she was investigating involved some very prominent families in town, Frank explained. The same families who still run most of the businesses here. If Elena had found evidence of corruption or illegal activity, it could have ruined a lot of people. I spent the rest of the morning reading through the newspaper archives, taking notes on every mention of Elena Hoffman. A pattern began to emerge. She had been asking questions about financial irregularities, attending town meetings, and demanding transparency in local government. In the months before her disappearance, her letters to the editor had become increasingly urgent. Her last published letter, dated just 1 week before she vanished, was particularly revealing. "Citizens of Millbrook, I have discovered evidence that certain members of our town council have been involved in fraudulent land deals that have cost our community hundreds of thousands of dollars. This corruption goes back decades and involves people we trust to represent our interests. I will be presenting this evidence at next Tuesday's town council meeting. The truth must be told, no matter who it hurts." The town council meeting mentioned in her letter took place on March 22, 1967. Elena disappeared on March 20th, 1967, 2 days before she was supposed to present her evidence. As I left the library, I noticed a black sedan parked across the street. The windows were tinted, and I couldn't see inside, but something about it made me uneasy. I had seen the same car parked outside the bank earlier that morning. When I started walking toward it, the engine started, and it drove away quickly. Margaret's warning echoed in my mind. "They'll try to erase you." Was someone already watching me? I decided to visit the town hall to look at the official records from 1967. The building was small and cramped, with files stored in boxes that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. The clerk, a young woman named Jessica, was helpful, but seemed nervous when I explained what I was looking for. "Town council records from 1967? She repeated, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm sorry, but those records are unavailable." "What do you mean unavailable?" "There was a fire in the basement storage area in 1975, she explained. "Most of the records from the late 1960s were destroyed. We only have basic information like birth certificates and property deeds." Another convenient coincidence. Elena disappears in 1967, and 8 years later, the town council records from that period are destroyed in a fire. Someone had been very thorough in covering their tracks. I asked to see the property records for the land deals Elena had been investigating. Jessica brought me a thick folder, but when I opened it, I found that several pages had been removed. The sections dealing with the specific properties Elena had questioned were missing. Who has access to these records? I asked. Only town council members and the mayor, Jessica replied, and occasionally lawyers or investigators with proper authorization. I was starting to understand the scope of what Elena had discovered. This wasn't just about a few corrupt officials. It was about a systematic cover-up that had been maintained for over 50 years. Elena had threatened to expose something big, and someone had made sure she couldn't. That afternoon, I decided to visit the site where Elena's car had been found. According to the newspaper reports, her vehicle had been discovered 2 days after her disappearance in a parking lot near Miller's Creek, about 5 miles outside of town. The creek was a popular spot for hiking and fishing, and the police had assumed she had gone there voluntarily. The parking lot was still there, though it was smaller than I had imagined. Miller's Creek ran through a dense forest with hiking trails that stretched for miles. I walked along the main trail, trying to understand why Elena would have come here, especially if she was afraid for her safety. About half a mile into the forest, I found something that made my blood run cold. Carved into the bark of an old oak tree were the initials E.H., Elena Hoffman. Below the initials was a date, March 20th, 1967, the day she disappeared. But these weren't casual carvings made by someone on a hiking trip. They were deep, deliberate, and looked like they had been made in a hurry. More importantly, they were carved about 7 feet up the tree trunk, far higher than Elena could have reached without assistance. Someone had lifted Elena up to carve these initials, or they had been carved by someone much taller than her. This wasn't a message Elena had left for herself. It was a message someone else had left about her. As I stood there examining the carving, I heard footsteps approaching on the trail behind me. I turned to see a man in his 70s walking toward me, wearing a flannel shirt and carrying a walking stick. He looked friendly enough, but something about his presence felt deliberate. "You're asking about Elena Hoffman," he said. It wasn't a question. "Did you know her?" I asked, my heart pounding. "I knew Elena," he replied. "My name is Thomas Brady. I was a police officer here when she disappeared. I was one of the first people to search these woods." Thomas looked around carefully, as if making sure we were alone. "I've been wondering when someone would finally come looking for the truth. Margaret tried for years, but she could never prove anything. You're Elena's granddaughter, aren't you? You look just like her." I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Elena didn't come here voluntarily," Thomas continued. "She was brought here. The crime scene was staged to look like she had gone hiking alone, but there were signs of a struggle that were never officially reported. I was a young officer then, and I was told to keep quiet about what I had seen." "What did you see?" "Tire tracks from multiple vehicles, footprints from several different people, and evidence that someone had been held against their will. Elena's car was driven here by someone else. The driver's seat was adjusted for someone much taller than she was." Thomas pointed to the tree with Elena's initials. "Those carvings were made by someone who wanted to send a message. They wanted people to know that Elena had been here, but they also wanted to make sure she would never leave." "Do you know who was responsible?" "I have my suspicions," Thomas said. "But the people involved were powerful, and they made sure the investigation was shut down quickly." The detective in charge was transferred to another county, and the case was closed within 6 months. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. "This is the phone number for Detective Roy Martinez. He was the lead investigator on Elena's case. He lives in Sacramento now, retired. If anyone can tell you the truth about what happened, it's him." Thomas looked around again, then leaned closer. "Be careful, Sarah. The same people who silenced Elena are still around, and they still have power in this town. If you keep asking questions, you might find yourself in the same situation she did." As he walked away, I realized that I was no longer just investigating a cold case. I was threatening people who had already killed to protect their secrets. Margaret had been right to warn me. They had tried to erase Elena, and if I got too close to the truth, they would try to erase me too. I hurried back to my car, constantly looking over my shoulder. The black sedan was parked at the trailhead, and as I drove away, I saw it following me at a distance. Someone was definitely watching me, and they wanted me to know it. That evening, I called Detective Martinez from the safety of Margaret's house. His voice was gruff but kind, and when I explained who I was and what I had discovered, he was quiet for a long moment. "I've been waiting for this call for 50 years, he finally said. "Elena Hoffman was murdered, and I was prevented from investigating it properly. If you're serious about finding the truth, you need to be prepared for what you might discover, and you need to be prepared for the people who will try to stop you." "I'm ready," I said, though I wasn't sure I meant it. "Meet me in Sacramento tomorrow. There are things I need to show you, things I've been keeping safe for decades. But Sarah, once you see what I have, there's no going back. Your life will never be the same." As I hung up the phone, I looked at Elena's coat hanging in the wardrobe. Tomorrow, I would learn the truth about what happened to my grandmother. But tonight, I had to survive long enough to get there. The black sedan was parked outside Margaret's house, and I could see the silhouette of someone sitting inside. They weren't even trying to hide anymore. The game had changed, and I was no longer just investigating a mystery. I was fighting for my life. The drive to Sacramento took 6 hours, and I spent most of it checking my rearview mirror. The black sedan had followed me for the first hour, but somewhere near Eugene, it had disappeared. I wasn't sure if that made me feel better or worse. Detective Roy Martinez lived in a modest ranch house in a quiet neighborhood. He was a tall, lean man in his 70s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. When he opened the door, he looked exactly like what I expected from a veteran detective, weathered by years of seeing the worst in people, but still determined to find the truth. "You look just like Elena," he said, ushering me into his living room. "I've been carrying this burden for 50 years, waiting for someone from her family to finally ask the right questions." His living room was filled with boxes of files, photographs, and documents. Roy had clearly been preparing for this moment for a long time. "Before I show you what I've discovered, I need you to understand something," he said, settling into his chair. Elena wasn't just investigating small-town corruption. She had uncovered evidence of a much larger conspiracy that involved federal crimes, money laundering, and organized crime. The people who killed her weren't just protecting their reputations, they were protecting their lives. He opened the first box and pulled out a thick folder. In 1966, Elena started asking questions about land deals in Millbrook. What she discovered was that the land wasn't being bought by legitimate developers. It was being purchased by shell companies connected to organized crime families from San Francisco. The documents Roy showed me were astounding. Elena had somehow obtained bank records, property deeds, and correspondence that proved millions of dollars in illegal transactions. The forest land around Millbrook was being used as a front for money laundering operations, with dirty money being cleaned through fake real estate transactions. "Elena was an accountant before she married your grandfather," Roy explained. "She knew how to read financial records, and she knew when something didn't add up. She spent months documenting everything, building a case that would have sent dozens of people to prison. The evidence was overwhelming. Elena had identified at least 15 different shell companies, tracked the movement of money through multiple bank accounts, and even obtained photographs of meetings between local officials and known criminals. She had been preparing to present this evidence to the FBI, not just to the town council. The night before she disappeared, Elena called me," Roy continued. "She said she had received death threats and was afraid for her safety. She was planning to take her evidence to the FBI field office in Portland the next morning." "What happened to her?" Roy's expression darkened. "Elena was kidnapped from her home early in the morning of March 20th, 1967. Her neighbors reported hearing a commotion around 5 a.m., but by the time anyone investigated, she was gone. Her car was moved to Miller's Creek to make it look like she had gone hiking." He pulled out a manila envelope and handed it to me. "These are the crime scene photographs from Elena's house. They were never included in the official file. The photographs showed clear signs of a struggle. Furniture was overturned, there were scuff marks on the floor, and a window had been broken from the inside. Most telling was a photograph of the kitchen, where Elena's purse and car keys were still sitting on the counter. If she had gone hiking voluntarily, she would have taken them with her. Elena was taken to an abandoned warehouse outside of town," Roy continued. "I know this because I found evidence that was never officially reported. Tire tracks, cigarette butts, and most importantly, this." He handed me a small evidence bag containing a gold button. "This came from Elena's coat, the same coat you're wearing now. I found it at the warehouse, along with evidence that someone had been held there against their will." I looked down at Elena's coat, running my fingers over the remaining buttons. One was indeed missing, and I could see where it had been torn away. What happened to her at the warehouse? Elena was interrogated for information about what she knew and who she had told. When they realized she had copies of all the evidence hidden in multiple locations, they tried to force her to reveal where they were. Roy's voice was heavy with sadness. Elena was a brave woman, but she was also a mother. She was worried about what would happen to your mother if she didn't cooperate. The next document Roy showed me was the most chilling. It was a handwritten note, supposedly from Elena, saying that she was leaving town voluntarily and didn't want to be followed. But the handwriting analysis Roy had commissioned years later proved it was forged. Elena never wrote that note, Roy said. It was written by someone else, someone who had studied her handwriting carefully. They used it to buy time and throw off the investigation. Do you know who killed her? Roy nodded grimly. Elena was killed by a man named Vincent Torino, an enforcer for the Marconi crime family from San Francisco. Torino was brought to Millbrook specifically to handle the Elena problem. He was known for making people disappear without a trace. The photograph Roy showed me was of a man in his 40s with cold, dead eyes. Vincent Torino looked exactly like the kind of person who could kill someone without feeling any remorse. Torino died in a car accident in 1974, Roy explained. But before he died, he confessed to a priest about killing a woman in Oregon. The priest came forward years later, but by then the case was officially closed and the evidence had been destroyed. I felt sick to my stomach. My grandmother had been murdered by a professional killer, and the truth had been covered up for over 50 years. What happened to Elena's body? She was buried in the mountains east of Millbrook, in a location that only Torino knew. The priest said Torino had expressed remorse about leaving her family without closure, but he had been paid too much money to reveal the location. Roy pulled out a map of the area around Millbrook, with several locations marked in red. I've spent decades searching for Elena's grave. These are the most likely locations based on Torino's description and the geography of the area. I've never had the resources to search them all properly. Looking at the map, I felt a mix of determination and dread. Elena deserved a proper burial, and her family deserved to know the truth. But I also realized that finding her grave would mean confronting the people who had killed her, and they were still alive. Who else was involved in the cover-up? Roy opened another box and pulled out photographs of several men. The mayor of Millbrook, Robert Daniels, town council members James Patterson and William Morrison, Sheriff Deputy Chief Charles Webb, and most importantly, a lawyer named Jonathan Hartwell who coordinated the entire operation. The photographs showed these men meeting with known criminals, accepting envelopes full of cash, and signing documents that transferred the illegal land deals. Elena had documented everything, and now Roy was showing me the evidence she had died trying to expose. Hartwell is still alive, Roy said. He's in his 80s now, living in a nursing home in Portland. He's the only one left who knows the full truth about what happened to Elena. I stared at the photograph of Jonathan Hartwell, a distinguished-looking man in his 50s wearing an expensive suit. He had been the architect of Elena's murder, the one who had coordinated with the crime families and arranged for her elimination. There's something else you need to know, Roy said. Elena had a safety deposit box at a bank in Portland, not just the one in Millbrook. She kept the most important evidence there, including recordings of conversations with the conspirators. My heart raced. The box in Millbrook was emptied in 1972. What about the one in Portland? As far as I know, it's still there. Elena gave the key to someone she trusted, someone who was supposed to open it if anything happened to her. But that person disappeared shortly after Elena did. Roy handed me a business card for Pacific National Bank in Portland. The box is registered under the name Elizabeth Harper, one of Elena's aliases. She was incredibly careful about protecting her evidence. I looked at the card, realizing that I now had a real chance to find the evidence Elena had died trying to protect. But I also understood the danger I was facing. The same people who had killed Elena were still alive, and they would kill me too if I got too close to the truth. Why didn't you ever pursue this case officially? I asked. Roy's expression became bitter. I tried. I presented my evidence to the FBI, to the state police, to anyone who would listen. But Hartwell had connections everywhere. My investigation was shut down, I was transferred to another county, and I was told to forget about Elena Hoffman. He pulled out a letter from his files. This is a direct order from the FBI field office in San Francisco, dated 6 months after Elena's disappearance. It states that the Elena Hoffman case is closed and that no further investigation should be conducted without federal approval. The letter was signed by Assistant Director Michael Walsh, and it was clear that the fix was in at the highest levels. Elena's murder had been covered up by federal authorities who were either corrupt or being pressured by people with significant power. "I've been waiting 50 years for someone to continue Elena's work," Roy said. "Margaret tried, but she didn't have access to the evidence that Elena had hidden. You're Elena's granddaughter, and you have a legal right to access her safety deposit box." He handed me a manila folder containing copies of all the evidence he had gathered over the decades. "This is everything I know about Elena's murder. Take it, find that safety deposit box, and finish what she started." As I prepared to leave Sacramento, Roy walked me to my car. "Be careful, Sarah. The people who killed Elena are old now, but they still have power and connections. If they think you're getting too close to the truth, they won't hesitate to eliminate you, too." I drove back toward Portland with Roy's files in my passenger seat and Elena's coat wrapped around me like armor. I now knew the truth about what had happened to my grandmother, but I also knew that the most dangerous part of my journey was just beginning. Elena had been murdered because she had discovered evidence of federal crimes involving organized crime and government corruption. The evidence still existed, hidden in a safety deposit box in Portland. If I could find it, I could finally expose the truth and bring justice for Elena's murder. But first, I had to survive long enough to get there. The black sedan was following me again, and this time I didn't think they were just watching. The Pacific National Bank in Portland was an imposing glass and steel building in the downtown business district. I had spent the previous night in a hotel, afraid to go back to my apartment in case someone was watching it. Elena's coat felt like a protective shield as I walked through the bank's revolving door, clutching the information Roy had given me about the safety deposit box. The bank manager, a professional woman in her 40s named Linda Rodriguez, reviewed my documentation carefully. I had Elena's death certificate, proof of my family relationship, and the alias information Roy had provided. Most importantly, I had a letter from Margaret's estate attorney establishing my legal right to access Elena's belongings. "Ms. Chen," Linda said, "I need to inform you that this safety deposit box has been the subject of numerous inquiries over the years. We've had lawyers, private investigators, and even federal agents asking about it. But you're the first person who has provided the proper legal documentation to access it." My heart was pounding as Linda led me to the safety deposit box vault. Box 247 was in the middle section, and it required 2 keys to open, one from the bank and one that Elena had hidden. Roy had given me the second key, which he had obtained from Elena's contact, who had disappeared shortly after her murder. The box was larger than I had expected, and it was completely full. Inside were manila folders, audio cassettes, photographs, and several notebooks filled with Elena's careful handwriting. As I began to examine the contents, I realized I was looking at the most comprehensive documentation of organized crime and government corruption I had ever seen. The first folder contained financial records that proved the money laundering operation was much larger than I had imagined. Elena had tracked millions of dollars moving through shell companies, not just in Millbrook, but throughout Oregon and Northern California. The operation had been running for years, and it involved dozens of legitimate businesses that were being used as fronts. The audio cassettes were even more damning. Elena had secretly recorded conversations with several of the conspirators, including Mayor Robert Daniels and lawyer Jonathan Hartwell. In one recording, Hartwell was clearly heard discussing the need to eliminate the problem if Elena didn't stop her investigation, but it was the photographs that provided the most shocking evidence. Elena had somehow obtained pictures of meetings between local officials and members of the Marconi crime family. The photographs showed briefcases full of cash being exchanged, documents being signed, and handshakes that sealed illegal deals. As I listened to the audio recordings, I heard Elena's voice for the first time. She sounded intelligent, determined, and increasingly frightened. In her final recording, made just 2 days before her disappearance, her voice was shaking. "If something happens to me, I want people to know that I was getting close to exposing the truth. Jonathan Hartwell has threatened me directly, and I believe my life is in danger. I've hidden copies of all this evidence in multiple locations. The truth must come out, no matter what happens to me. The notebooks contained Elena's detailed analysis of the financial transactions, including her calculations of how much money had been stolen from legitimate land deals and how it was being laundered through the criminal network. She had been preparing to present this evidence to a federal task force investigating organized crime on the West Coast. I spent 3 hours in that vault, photographing every document and recording every detail. When I finally emerged, I knew I had enough evidence to reopen Elena's case and potentially send several people to prison, even 50 years later. But I also knew that the moment I made this evidence public, I would become a target. As I left the bank, I noticed the same black sedan parked across the street. This time I could see 2 men inside, and they weren't trying to hide their surveillance. I walked quickly to my car, my mind racing with plans for what to do next. I decided to drive straight to the FBI field office in Portland. If I was going to expose this conspiracy, I needed federal protection and support. The evidence Elena had gathered was too important to risk losing, and I couldn't fight this battle alone. Special Agent Michelle Torres was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who specialized in cold cases involving organized crime. When I explained what I had discovered and showed her copies of Elena's evidence, her expression became very serious. "Ms. Chen, this is potentially one of the most significant breakthroughs we've seen in a decades-old case," she said, examining the photographs and financial records. "If this evidence is authentic, it could reopen multiple federal investigations that were closed in the 1970s. Agent Torres called in several other agents, including specialists in financial crimes and organized crime. For the next 4 hours, they went through Elena's evidence piece by piece, verifying the authenticity of the documents and cross-referencing them with existing federal files. Your grandmother was incredibly thorough, Agent Torres told me. She documented a conspiracy that involved not just local corruption, but federal crimes including money laundering, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit murder. Some of the people she identified are still alive, and they can still be prosecuted. The FBI immediately placed me in protective custody. I was moved to a safe house outside Portland, while they began the process of building cases against the surviving conspirators. Agent Torres explained that it would take months to fully investigate all of Elena's evidence, but they already had enough to make arrests. The first arrest came 3 days later. Jonathan Hartwell, now 83 years old and living in a nursing home, was taken into custody on charges of conspiracy, racketeering, and accessory to murder. The local news showed footage of FBI agents carrying boxes of evidence out of his room. Over the next 2 weeks, 5 more arrests were made. Several of the conspirators had died over the years, but those who were still alive found themselves facing federal charges that could put them in prison for the rest of their lives. The media attention was overwhelming. The story of Elena Hoffman's murder and the 50-year cover-up became national news. Reporters called it one of the most significant cold case breakthroughs in FBI history, and Elena's story inspired documentaries, podcast series, and true crime specials. But for me, the most important moment came 6 weeks after I had found Elena's evidence. The FBI, using ground-penetrating radar and Elena's detailed geographical notes, finally located her grave in the mountains east of Millbrook. After 54 years, Elena Hoffman was finally coming home. The funeral was held on a sunny autumn morning in Portland. Elena's body was interred next to my grandfather Robert, who had died believing that his wife had abandoned him and their daughter. Margaret was buried nearby, and I placed flowers on her grave as well, thanking her for protecting Elena's secrets until the right person could expose the truth. My mother, Annie, was now 62 years old and had spent her entire life believing that Rose was her real mother. When I showed her the evidence about Elena, she broke down crying. She had vague memories of a woman who had sung to her and made her favorite cookies, memories that everyone had told her were just childhood fantasies. "I always felt like something was missing," my mother said, holding Elena's coat. "I had dreams about a woman who looked like you, who looked like me. Everyone said it was just my imagination, but she was real. She was my mother." The trial of Jonathan Hartwell and his co-conspirators began 8 months later. I testified as the key witness, explaining how I had discovered Elena's evidence and what it revealed about the conspiracy. The prosecution used Elena's recordings, photographs, and financial documents to prove that she had been murdered to prevent her from exposing federal crimes. Hartwell, now facing the rest of his life in prison, finally agreed to cooperate with federal authorities. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he provided detailed information about the conspiracy, including the location of other evidence that had been hidden for decades. Elena Hoffman was the bravest person I ever met, Agent Torres told me after the trial concluded. She risked everything to expose the truth, and she paid the ultimate price. But because of your determination to find answers, justice has finally been served. The convictions made headlines across the country. Hartwell was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, and his co-conspirators received sentences ranging from 15 to 30 years. At 83, Hartwell would likely die in prison, a fitting end for someone who had orchestrated my grandmother's murder. But the legal victory was only part of my journey. Over the past year, I had discovered not just the truth about Elena's death, but also the strength and courage that ran in my family. Elena had refused to be silenced even when her life was threatened. Margaret had spent decades protecting Elena's secrets and searching for the truth, and I had found the determination to finish what they had started. 6 months after the trial ended, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I quit my job as a graphic designer and enrolled in law school. Elena's fight for justice had inspired me to become someone who could help other families find the truth about their missing loved ones. I kept Elena's coat, and I wore it to every major milestone in my legal education. When I graduated law school 3 years later, when I passed the bar exam, and when I opened my own practice specializing in cold cases and missing persons, I wore Elena's coat as a reminder of where my passion for justice had begun. My law practice became successful quickly, partly because of the media attention from Elena's case, but mostly because I had learned from the best teacher possible, my grandmother, who had shown me that the truth is worth fighting for, no matter how powerful the people who want to hide it. I still live in Portland, but I frequently visit Millbrook, where I've established a foundation in Elena's name to help families of missing persons. The foundation provides resources for private investigations, legal assistance, and support for families who are searching for answers about their loved ones. The house in Millbrook is now a resource center for the foundation. Margaret's hidden room in the basement has been converted into an archive where we store evidence and information about unsolved cases. Elena's story has inspired dozens of other families to come forward with information about missing relatives, and we've helped solve 6 other cold cases in the past 2 years. The transformation of Millbrook itself has been remarkable. The town that once harbored such dark secrets has become a symbol of transparency and justice. The corrupt officials who had controlled the town for decades were finally exposed, and new leadership emerged that was committed to honest governance. The land that had been stolen through fraudulent deals was returned to public ownership and turned into a memorial park, honoring Elena and other victims of corruption. Local businesses that had been forced to pay protection money to the criminal network were finally free to operate honestly. The economic impact was immediate and positive. New shops opened, tourism increased as people came to visit the memorial park, and young families began moving to Millbrook for the first time in decades. I often walk through the memorial park wearing Elena's coat, reading the names of other victims whose stories we've helped tell. There's a special section dedicated to unsolved cases, where families can post information about missing loved ones, and volunteers can offer assistance. The park has become a gathering place for the community, a symbol of hope that replaced the fear that had dominated Millbrook for so long. The ripple effects of Elena's case extended far beyond Millbrook. The FBI used her evidence to reopen dozens of other cases from the 1960s and 1970s, leading to additional arrests and convictions. The organized crime network that had seemed so powerful 50 years ago was finally dismantled completely, with assets worth millions of dollars being recovered and returned to their rightful owners. Agent Torres became a close friend and mentor during my transition into law enforcement. She taught me that solving cold cases requires not just dedication, but also the ability to see patterns that others might miss. Elena's methodical approach to documenting evidence became my model for how to investigate complex cases. Your grandmother was ahead of her time, Agent Torres told me during one of our regular meetings. She used investigative techniques that weren't widely known until decades later. She understood that fighting corruption requires documentation, persistence, and the courage to keep going, even when powerful people try to stop you. The techniques Elena had developed became the foundation for new FBI training programs on investigating financial crimes and organized crime. Her case study is now taught at law enforcement academies across the country, inspiring a new generation of investigators to never give up on finding the truth. My law practice has grown to include a team of 12 investigators, paralegals, and attorneys who specialize in cold cases. We work closely with law enforcement agencies, but we also take cases that the official system can't or won't pursue. Many of our clients are families like mine, people who have been told that their loved ones' cases are closed, but who refuse to accept that answer. One of our most significant cases involved a woman named Maria Santos, whose daughter had disappeared in 1985. The police had classified it as a runaway case, but Maria had never believed that her daughter would leave voluntarily. Using Elena's methodical approach, we discovered that her daughter had been a witness to a drug deal gone wrong and had been eliminated to prevent her from testifying. The case took 2 years to solve, but we eventually found evidence that led to the arrest of the man who had killed Maria's daughter. More importantly, we found her daughter's remains and were able to give Maria the closure she had been seeking for 35 years. "You gave me back my daughter," Maria told me at the funeral. "I can finally grieve properly, and I can finally find peace." That's what Elena's legacy is really about, giving families the truth they deserve and the closure they need to heal. Every case we solve is a victory not just for that family, but for the principle that no one should be forgotten, no matter how much time has passed. The Elena Hoffman Foundation has also become a training ground for young investigators who want to specialize in cold cases. We offer internships, scholarships, and mentorship programs that teach the skills needed to solve complex cases that have gone cold. Many of our graduates have gone on to work for major law enforcement agencies, carrying Elena's methods and principles with them. One of our most promising young investigators is a woman named Jessica Chen, no relation to me, despite the shared surname. Jessica had her own family mystery involving a grandfather who had disappeared during the Korean War. Using the techniques she learned at the foundation, she was able to prove that he had been captured and killed by enemy forces, finally giving her family the military recognition and benefits they deserved. Elena's story inspired me to never give up on finding the truth, Jessica told me. Even when everyone else said it was impossible, I remembered that she had spent years building her case, and that persistence eventually pays off. The foundation has also embraced new technology to help solve cold cases. We use DNA analysis, facial recognition software, and advanced database searches that weren't available when Elena was conducting her investigation. But the fundamental principles remain the same: careful documentation, persistent investigation, and the courage to confront powerful people who want to keep the truth hidden. We've created an online database where families can upload information about missing persons, and volunteers can contribute tips and leads. The database has been crucial in solving several cases where families in different states had pieces of the same puzzle without realizing it. The most rewarding part of my work is seeing the impact that finding the truth has on families. I've watched elderly parents finally learn what happened to children who disappeared decades ago. I've seen siblings discover that their missing brother or sister was actually a victim of a crime, not someone who had abandoned the family. I've helped families understand that they weren't responsible for their loved one's disappearance, lifting guilt that had haunted them for years. But the work isn't just about individual cases. The foundation has become a voice for policy changes that make it easier to investigate cold cases. We've lobbied for laws that require police departments to periodically review unsolved cases, for funding that supports DNA testing of old evidence, and for training programs that teach investigators how to handle complex financial crimes. Elena's case has also had a profound impact on how organized crime is investigated and prosecuted. The evidence she gathered showed how criminals could use legitimate businesses as fronts for illegal activities, and how corruption could protect criminal networks for decades. Her work contributed to changes in federal law that made it easier to prosecute conspiracy cases and to seize assets from criminal organizations. The coat itself has become a symbol of the Foundation's work. I wear it to every major case resolution, to court appearances, and to speaking engagements where I tell Elena's story. It serves as a reminder that sometimes the most important evidence is hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right person to find it. I've received offers from museums and collectors who want to acquire the coat, but I've turned them all down. The coat belongs with Elena's story, and Elena's story belongs with the families who are still searching for answers about their missing loved ones. The speaking engagements have become an important part of my work. I travel across the country telling Elena's story to law enforcement groups, victim advocacy organizations, and families of missing persons. The response is always the same. People are inspired by Elena's courage and motivated to continue fighting for justice in their own cases. "Your grandmother's story gives me hope," a mother in Denver told me after one of my presentations. "My son disappeared 15 years ago, and the police have given up. But hearing about Elena makes me believe that the truth is still out there, waiting to be found. That hope is what drives me every day." Elena's fight for truth didn't end with her death. It continues through every family that refuses to give up, every investigator who takes on a cold case, and every person who believes that justice delayed is not justice denied. The financial impact of Elena's case has been significant as well. The recovery of assets from the criminal network has funded victim compensation programs, supported cold case investigations, and provided resources for families of missing persons. The money that was stolen through fraudulent land deals has been returned to the communities that were victimized, funding schools, parks, and social services that improve people's lives. But perhaps the most important legacy is the change in how people think about unsolved cases. Elena's story has shown that no case is ever truly closed, that evidence can survive for decades, and that the truth has a way of eventually coming to light. Families who might have given up hope are now motivated to keep searching, knowing that breakthrough can come at any time. The annual Elena Hoffman Memorial Conference has become the largest gathering of cold case investigators in the country. Hundreds of law enforcement officers, private investigators, and family members come together to share techniques, discuss cases, and honor the memory of victims who have been forgotten by the official system, but remembered by their loved ones. This year's conference featured presentations on new DNA technology, advanced database searches, and innovative investigative techniques. But the most powerful moment was when we honored 12 families who had finally found answers about their missing loved ones during the past year. Watching their tears of relief and gratitude reminded me why Elena's work was so important and why it must continue. My mother, Annie, has become one of the Foundation's most dedicated volunteers. She spends hours each week helping other families navigate the complex process of investigating cold cases. Her own experience of learning the truth about Elena has given her a unique perspective on what families need during their search for answers. "I understand what it's like to live with questions," she tells the families we help. "I spent 60 years believing a lie about my own mother, but finding the truth was worth the pain, because now I can honor her memory properly." Annie has also become the keeper of Elena's story within our family. She's collected photographs, documents, and memories from relatives who knew Elena before her disappearance. These materials have become part of the Foundation's archive, preserving Elena's life and personality for future generations. The impact on my personal life has been profound as well. The investigation changed me from someone who avoided conflict and preferred to work behind the scenes into someone who is willing to confront powerful people and demand accountability. Elena's courage inspired me to find my own voice and to use it to speak for those who can no longer speak for themselves. I've also learned that solving one case often opens doors to solving others. The network of contacts I developed during Elena's investigation has helped me solve dozens of other cases. Police officers, FBI agents, private investigators, and family members have all become part of an informal network that shares information and resources to help solve cold cases. The Foundation has also become a model for other organizations around the country. We've helped establish similar foundations in 12 other states, each one focused on solving cold cases and helping families find answers about their missing loved ones. The network of foundations shares resources, expertise, and information, creating a national movement dedicated to ensuring that no one is forgotten. Elena's story has also inspired books, documentaries, and podcasts that have reached millions of people. Each new telling of her story motivates more people to get involved in cold case investigations, whether as volunteers, donors, or advocates for policy changes that support families of missing persons. The transformation in my own family has been remarkable. Relatives who had been estranged for decades have reconnected, united by their shared desire to honor Elena's memory. We've established new traditions, including an annual family gathering where we share stories about Elena and discuss the Foundation's work. My cousin David, who had never shown interest in family history, has become one of the Foundation's most effective fundraisers. He organizes charity events, solicits donations from local businesses, and uses his connections in the business community to support our work. Elena's story made me realize that family isn't just about the people who are alive today, he told me. It's about honoring the people who came before us and making sure their sacrifices weren't in vain. The Foundation has also become a catalyst for healing in Millbrook itself. The town that was once divided by secrets and corruption has become a community united by a commitment to truth and justice. Former enemies have become allies, working together to build a better future for their children. The Memorial Park has become a place where people come to reflect on the importance of truth and justice. School groups take field trips there to learn about Elena's story and to understand how one person's courage can change an entire community. The park includes an interactive exhibit where visitors can learn about the investigative techniques Elena used and how they contributed to solving her case. As I write this, exactly 5 years after I first found the letter sewn into Elena's coat, I'm preparing to announce a major expansion of the Foundation's work. We're launching a national database of missing persons cases that will make it easier for families and investigators to share information and collaborate on solving cold cases. The database will include not just missing persons cases, but also unsolved murders, unidentified remains, and other cases where families are searching for answers. It will be free to use and will include advanced search capabilities that can help identify patterns and connections across different cases. Elena's methodical approach to documentation and investigation will be built into the database's design. Users will be guided through the process of gathering evidence, documenting leads, and building cases that can withstand legal scrutiny. The database will also include training materials, investigative resources, and connections to experts who can help with specific types of cases. The launch of the database represents the culmination of everything Elena started 54 years ago. Her fight for truth and justice has evolved into a national movement that helps hundreds of families every year find answers about their missing loved ones. But the work is far from over. Every day, new cases are added to our files, new families contact us for help, and new challenges emerge that require innovative solutions. Elena's legacy is not just about solving one case. It's about creating a system that ensures no one is forgotten and no family is left without answers. As I sit in my office, surrounded by case files and wearing Elena's coat, I often think about the letter that started this journey. The warning that they'll try to erase you has become a rallying cry for everyone who refuses to let the powerful silence the truth. Elena wasn't erased, and neither will any of the other victims whose stories we continue to tell. The coat has become more than just a piece of clothing. It's a symbol of resilience, courage, and the power of one person to change the world. Every time I put it on, I'm reminded that Elena's fight continues, and that her victory is measured not just in the convictions we've achieved, but in the hope we've given to families who thought they would never find answers. The letter was sewn into the coat as a warning, but it became a promise that the truth would eventually come to light, that justice would eventually be served, and that love would ultimately triumph over fear. Elena kept that promise, and through the foundation that bears her name, we continue to keep it for families across the country who are still searching for answers about their missing loved ones. Every morning, I put on Elena's coat and remember the letter that started this journey. They'll try to erase you, just like they tried to erase her. But Elena wasn't erased. Her courage lives on in the foundation that bears her name, in the families who have found closure, and in the knowledge that justice can prevail even decades after a crime has been committed. The people who killed my grandmother thought they could make her disappear, that they could erase her from history and silence her forever. They were wrong. Elena Hoffman's voice is stronger now than it ever was when she was alive, and her fight for truth and justice continues through everyone who refuses to let the powerful prey on the innocent. Sometimes late at night, when I'm working on a difficult case, I can almost hear Elena's voice encouraging me to keep searching, to never give up. to remember that every victim deserves justice and every family deserves the truth. The letter sewn into her coat led me to uncover not just a conspiracy, but a legacy of courage that will continue long after I'm gone. Elena Hoffman was not erased. She was remembered, honored, and vindicated. And through the foundation that bears her name, she continues to help other families find the truth they deserve. Her coat hangs in my office now, a symbol that no matter how powerful the people who commit crimes might be, and no matter how long they think they can hide the truth, justice will eventually find a way. The letter was right. They tried to erase her, but they failed. Elena Hoffman's story will be told for generations, a testament to the power of one person's determination to expose the truth and proof that love, courage, and justice can triumph over even the darkest conspiracies. In the end, the coat wasn't just a piece of clothing with a hidden letter. It was a connection across generations, a symbol of unfinished business, and ultimately, a beacon of hope that guided me toward the truth. Elena's fight became my fight, and her victory became a victory for every family who has ever wondered what happened to someone they loved. The truth had been hidden for 54 years, but it was never truly lost. It was waiting, like Elena's letter, for the right person to find it and bring it into the light. Sometimes the most important messages are the ones that take decades to deliver, and sometimes the greatest victories are won by people who never lived to see them.